Selected. Selected. Screen recording. Button. Volume. 1. Right. Screen. Lock rotation. Media controls. Next track. Airplane. Next track. Next track.
I am going to a city where the streets are called our name, where the tree of life is blooming, and the roses never fade.
Hello, my name is Warren Kenney. I preach for the Church of Christ in Martinsburg, West Virginia. I am the father of David Kenney, who speaks on this program all the time. I am in Wadsworth conducting a series of lessons under the theme, The Christian Man. And I am so pleased to have the invitation to come to this television program and present some of what I'm presenting at the church building from service to service on Good Avenue, West Good Avenue, the Wadsworth Church of Christ. And I'm pleased as I can be to have been invited to come and share those lessons and to come to this TV program and present a lesson or two or three by this means. I want to begin our study this morning by turning your mind's attention to an Old Testament passage, 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Now the days of David drew near that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do wherever you turn, that the Lord may fulfill his word, which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons take heed to their way and walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, he said, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Now, when David spoke those words, he was an old man. He was an old man ready to die. And he's speaking to his son, who shall succeed him on the throne, whose name was Solomon. And he called upon Solomon to be a man. And he even told him what that means, what it would mean, what he would have to do in order to be a man. He said, first of all, you must obey God's will, as is revealed through the law of Moses. That was the law that they then were operating under. He said, you need to be kind. You need to be gentle when possible. But you also need to be unbending when necessary. So, from David we learn that the ideal man is a man of strength. But not only strength, but endurance and temperance. But at the same time, he's also to be a man of gentleness, a man of tenderness, generosity, and patience. It takes a blending of those traits to be the kind of man who will make the greatest contribution to our society. But the question is, what does it mean? The Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 16:13, "Watch ye, stand fast in the faith, quit you like men, be strong." The New American Standard renders that, "Be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong." But we see that and we ask the question, what does that mean? What does it mean to act like a man? How in the world is a man supposed to act? How do we act in a way that shows that we're men? That shows that we know what it means to be a man. And the problem is that people are divided in their answers on that question. It seems that no one is able to give you a firm, set in concrete answer to the question, what is a real man? Sometimes our answer is based upon preconceived ideas, and those preconceived ideas may be erroneous. We may be wrong in our thinking. I remember back when I was a boy, back in the dark ages, I didn't consider myself to be man enough to go out for the basketball team. Now, I was 6'2" tall. I wasn't a shrimp. And the basketball coach thought that at 6 feet 2.5 inches, I ought to be on his ball team. And he did not easily give up. He was not easily dissuaded. But I never gave in. But on the other hand, I thought that the band was for sissies. So I had a dilemma. I was not man enough in my mind to be on the ball team. But I wasn't a sissy, and so I didn't go out for the band. So I missed being a part of the sports program, and I missed being a part of the music program. In fact, had everyone had my ideas along that line, or my attitude, there would have been no sports program. There would have been no music program. I wasn't manly enough to be a sports person, and I certainly wasn't going to march around in a uniform. So I did neither. But I was wrong in that assessment. When we want the answer to the question, what's a man? Where do we turn? Where can we turn to find the answer to the question, what is a real man? Well, it would seem to me that since our Lord created man, all things were made by him, and without him was nothing made that was made, King James Version. Since he created man, and since he knows what is in man, he had no need that anyone should testify to him of man, for he knew what was in man. I was teaching a Bible class one time many years ago, and there was a lady in that class that was a very sharp Bible student. She was a little slow in thinking, but she wasn't slow this morning. I read this passage or one like it, and I said, does that comfort you, or does that scare you? And she immediately said, it depends on what's in me. And so we need to realize that we are an open book before God. He knows what's in us. He knows what's in man. And since He gave His word to us that equips us for life and godliness, Paul told Timothy, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. And Peter said, as His divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of Him who called us by glory and virtue. Now, since all that's true, it is only logical that we turn to that word, that we turn to His word to find out the answer. What is a real man supposed to do? How is he supposed to act? But I want, first of all, to remind all of us that it takes time. It takes a lot of time to construct a man. We don't like to hear that because we like easy fixes. We like quick solutions. It was okay a long time ago to say Rome wasn't built in a day, but we don't want to hear that today. We live in a different time. We live in the time of microwaves. We put our meal in and push a few seconds or a few minutes and hit the start button, and before we know it, we're pulling it out and enjoying our feast. We live in a day of 3-step success programs. And we live in a computerized society that makes us impatient. We want it over and done with by the time of the 5 o'clock commute. And we as Christians can allow thinking like that to cause us to become impatient. Impatient in the development of Christian maturity. We can become impatient with ourselves as we look at ourselves and understand we're not growing as rapidly as we'd like. Or we may even become impatient with others as we see them not growing as fast as we'd like. Paul, in writing to the Roman Christians, said, I beseech you, and that word beseech means beg, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed, that means fashioned by this world, but be transformed. That word is metamorphosis, our word metamorphosis. It describes the process by which a caterpillar becomes a beautiful butterfly. Be you transformed by the renewing, and that's talking about a change in the mind. By the renewing, but it's not just any change of the mind. It's a change of the mind for the better, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So we're not to configure ourselves according to the fashion of the times in which we live, but we are to be transformed by a renewal of our mind. And it all begins with the mind. It begins with the mind because we are what we think. Solomon said, as he thinks in his heart, so is he. We are products of our thinking. Jesus warned that what's in the heart will be displayed in our lives. Out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts and murders and adulteries and fornications, thefts, false witness, and blasphemies. I've actually heard people say of individuals that were guilty of these things, oh, I know they did that, but down deep inside they have a good heart. Listen, friend, Jesus didn't know that. He said their heart's rotten. Those things proceed from the heart. And no wonder that Solomon warned us, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues, or spring, the issues of life. And James said, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. And we are to replace those things with things that are true, things that are noble, things that are just, things that are pure, things that are lovely and of good report, and virtuous and praiseworthy. And in fact, getting back to our comment on the heart, he says, meditate on these things. Where do we meditate? Well, you say, I meditate in my bedroom. That's not what I mean. Where do we meditate? We meditate in the mind. We use our mind to meditate. And so he's calling for us to meditate on all of those things that are good. And that takes a lifelong investment. There's enough in Philippians 4, verse 8 to keep us busy for the 9 lives of a cat, and even longer than that. You just try doing what that passage says, meditate on these things, and you'll find yourself involved in a lifelong process. It's a lifelong investment. There are no shortcuts on the road to becoming a man. Consider this, if you would. Paul said, not that I've already attained, King James Version says arrived, or am already made perfect, perfected, but I press on, that I may lay hold of that which Jesus Christ has also laid hold of me. Now think about that just for a moment. If the Apostle Paul obeyed the gospel in 37 AD, which is the assumed date of so many, and he wrote to the Philippians in 61 AD, it took nearly a quarter of a century for that great man to arrive at the point he's talking about in Philippians 3, verse 12. And he says, I still have a way to go. I still have not traveled the whole journey. He had been at it for nearly a quarter of a century. It takes time to develop Christian manhood. And that's not said to discourage you, but it is said simply to help us face reality. We're not going to make the trip overnight. We're not going to grow into maturity from just one day to the next. And the time it takes to make that journey depends in a very large way upon where we began. Now, from where I live, I can drive to Washington, D.C. in 60 minutes, give or take. But not everyone in the country can do that. So far as I know, there's no one in the city of Wadsworth, Ohio, who can drive to Washington, D.C. in 60 minutes. it's an impossibility. Well, why is that true? Is it because I'm a speed demon? No, it's because I begin from a different starting place. And you begin from a different starting place. If everyone, though, had the very same beginning place, there would still be some variance in our arrival times. Variance because maybe you stay right on the speed limit or even push that a little bit, and I stay under the speed limit. Well, even though we began at the same place, the fact remains that we won't arrive at the same time. I was interested in seeing some of the sights as I drove along. And not only that, but I'm married to a wonderful wife who has slowed me down considerably over the years. Maybe your trip is beset with difficulties that I didn't have. And so I made it there more quickly than you. So it depends upon where we started. When we began this journey to Christian manhood, we did so from a variety of backgrounds. We did so from a variety of experiences. And these backgrounds, these experiences, affect how we travel. They affect the progress that we make. Have you ever noticed how some become Christians? They take hold immediately and they begin growing in a very deliberate and rabid fashion. They begin, as my mother used to say, they begin growing like weeds. And that means that they grew fast and grew furious. Now, sometimes, although not always, the reason for that can be traced back to a difference in their starting point. And just as we illustrated with the trip to D.C., the starting point of our development of manhood may be different for one than it is for another, and consequently one may travel more rapidly than the other. Perhaps they came from a background with good role models. I'm thankful that describes myself. Not that I'm any great one, but I came from a background of good role models. I got to see Christian manhood and manhood in general on display from some of the best men, in my judgment, who ever walked on the face of this earth. Now, not only that, but maybe they came from a good home atmosphere, and that gives them quite an advantage. Or perhaps they managed not to fall into the trap of alcohol abuse or other drug abuses and sexual sin. These fortunate people could be compared to a man in the New Testament whose name was Timothy. Timothy had learned the scriptures from the time he was a child. Paul said to him, and you know, Paul told the Philippian Christians that there's just no one like Timothy. He was an outstanding man. And he said to Timothy, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded in you also. Now, Timothy's father was not a Christian, not a believer, and yet he traveled rapidly. I thank you for your time today, and Lord willing, we shall continue when we're together next time. Thank you.
AirPlay audio button. Lock screen. Bright volume. Selected. Music selected.